Atlanta. A hangar off I-285 does cold concrete, engine fuel, and silence. A man crouches beside the nose gear of a white Cessna Citation. 2 fingers. Slows the way as his uncle taught him, trust your hands before anything else. His phone buzzes. He reads it once, reads it again, stands up. Outside, headlights cut across the tarmac, a black SUV, then another. Doors open, heels on concrete, the deliberate sound of people who have rehearsed this arrival. She steps into the hangar light in a black dress that cost more than a car payment. Hair straight past her shoulders. Not a strand at belongs. Beside her, a silver-haired attorney with a leather portfolio pressed against his ribs like a weapon. The man by the plane does not move toward them. He waits. Because here's the thing, nobody in that hangar understands yet except him. She don't come to take something from him. She came to finish something she started 11 years ago, and he has known about it for weeks. Some men lose everything in a courtroom. Some men lose everything at a dinner table. Years before any lawyer gets involved, years before anyone signs anything. Years before the word divorce gets said out loud in a quiet house on a Tuesday night. Dion Webb was the second kind. He just didn't know it yet. Here is what you need to know before this story really starts. 3 things, and all 3 of them matter. First, a woman named Simone is going to walk into a hangar in Atlanta on a Thursday morning thinking she already won, dressed for it, prepared for it, certain of it. Second, what Dion is about to find out is going to reach back 11 years, not 8, not 6, 11, all the way back to when he was still bringing her flowers on Thursday nights and believing completely that they were building something together. Third, there is someone in this story who has been standing on Dion's side the entire time. Someone he never asked, someone he never knew was there, and you won't see it coming until the very end. Stay with this one. Dion Webb grew up in Southside Atlanta, in the kind of neighborhood where nobody locked their cars because there was nothing worth stealing inside them. The streets smelled like exhaust and cut grass in summer. In winter they smelled like nothing, just cold. His mother Gloria worked the early shift at a hospital laundry facility for 22 years. She ironed other people's sheets and came home and ironed Dion's school shirts and never once complained about either task. She was not a woman who complained. She was a woman who handled things. There is a difference. His father was around until Dion was 9. Then he wasn't. No dramatic exit. No big argument Dion could point to later and say that was the moment. Just a gradual absence that one day became permanent. Like a plant that doesn't get watered. You don't notice until it's already gone. Which is why Dion went to spend weekends with his uncle Raymond. Raymond Webb ran a mechanic shop off South Arlington Road for 31 years. Small place, 2 bays, a hand-painted sign that had faded so much by the time Dion started working there that you could barely read what it said. Raymond didn't advertise. He didn't need to. People knew where he was and they kept coming back because he was honest and because honest mechanics in Southside Atlanta were rarer than people liked to admit. Raymond was not a warm man. He wasn't cold either. He was precise. He believed there was a right way to do every single thing, and that the right way always took longer than the wrong way, and that the longer way was always worth it. He taught Dion by letting him touch things, not by explaining, not by demonstrating from a distance. He would hand Dion a brake caliper or a valve cover gasket and say nothing. Just wait, and Dion would turn the thing over in his hands and figure out what it was trying to tell him. Raymond used to say, "You just have to be patient enough to listen." Dion carried that lesson out of the shop and into every room he ever entered after that. He put himself through college on a partial academic scholarship and 3 years of overnight work at a regional freight carrier. No ceremony when he graduated, no family dinner, there was no money for ceremony, and honestly the degree was just the next tool. Something to have, something to use. He started Ellison Freight in the spare bedroom of a 1-bedroom apartment when he was 26. 1 desk, 1 laptop. A filing cabinet he bought secondhand from an office liquidation sale in Decatur. He spent the first 2 years cold calling freight brokers and showing up in person when they didn't call back, wearing the same 2 suits on rotation and hoping nobody noticed. They probably noticed. He didn't stop anyway. By 33 he had a real office. By 37 he had a fleet. By 41 he had a federal contract that changed the shape of everything. A deal he had been quietly negotiating for 2 years while his marriage was dissolving around him like sugar in warm water. Slow then all at once. The plane came after that, a Cessna Citation, white with a thin charcoal stripe. Not flashy, not the kind of thing you buy to make people look at you. The kind of thing you buy because your business needs it and you finally have enough to get it right. Dion had test-flown 3 other models before settling on this one. He chose it the way Raymond taught him to choose tools, by how it felt in his hands. He was in the hangar on a Thursday morning, doing a pre-flight inspection when his phone buzzed. Calvin message. She's on her way. Holt is with her. 20 minutes. Dion read the text twice, stood still for a moment, looked at the plane, then he typed back 2 words. I know. He put the phone in his pocket, went back to checking the starboard engine housing, slow, deliberate, the way Raymond taught him. Because here's the thing about Dion Webb. He does not rush when things get hard. He slows down. He has always been this way. It is the thing that made him good at freight logistics. It is the thing that made him dangerous in a negotiation. And it is the thing that was about to make Simone very, very sorry she came to this hangar at all. But she didn't know that yet. Nobody ever knows that about Dion until it's too late. He had met Simone Caldwell at a charity gala in Buckhead when he was 28 and she was 23. He remembered everything about that night with the kind of precision that has nothing to do with romance and everything to do with the fact that Dion Webb simply remembers things that matter. She was wearing a red dress. Not bright red, the deep kind, the color of something serious. She walked into the room and did not look around to see who was watching. She already knew. That was what stopped him from across the room, not the dress, not the way she looked, though she was extraordinary. Tall, she turned sharp of a calm skin, the color of warm honey, and eyes that suggested she was always 2 thoughts ahead of whoever she was talking to. What stopped him was the way she moved. Like the room had already been arranged for her arrival and she was simply taking her place in it. He introduced himself. She shook his hand like she'd been expecting him. They were married 3 years later, in a small ceremony at a venue in Inman Park. 60 people, good food, a band that played real music, not background noise. Gloria cried twice. Raymond did not cry, but he shook Dion's hand afterward with both of his, which was as close as Raymond ever got. The first 4 years were good. Not perfect, but good. Dion was still in the building phase, working 14-hour days and coming home tired in a way that went all the way down to the bones. Simone was building her interior design practice. She had a gift for it. Not just the aesthetic part, but the relational part. She could sit with a client for 40 minutes and walk out knowing exactly what they wanted, even when they hadn't said it clearly themselves. People trusted her immediately. She had a face that invited trust. He did not know yet how she used that. By year 7, something shifted. It didn't shift loudly. It didn't announce itself. It was just quieter. Dinners that ended earlier. Conversations that stayed on the surface. She traveled more for work, or said she did. She came home and told him about clients he'd never met in neighborhoods he'd never been to, and he listened and believed her because there was no reason not to. He was focused on the federal contract, the biggest thing he'd ever chased. 2 years of meetings and paperwork and carefully managed relationships. He was in his head about it in the way you can only be about something you want very badly and are terrified of losing. So he wasn't watching closely enough. He knows that now. The divorce was finalized 9 months before the morning this story begins. Simone's our attorney, a man named Bernard Holt, 58 years old, silver-haired, the kind of man who speaks slowly because he knows everyone will wait. Pushed hard for half of everything. Calvin pushed back harder with documentation. The final settlement gave Simone the house in Buckhead, 1 vehicle, and a negotiated cash payment. The house was appraised at $625,000. She pushed for it specifically. Firmly, with a particular kind of quiet insistence that her attorney dressed up as sentiment. She wanted the home they'd shared. She wanted continuity. Dion let her have it. He took the company, and the contract, and the silence of a life he now had to figure out how to live alone. He thought that was the end of it. He was wrong. The hangar air was cold in the way that enclosed concrete spaces are always cold, regardless of the season. Dion was crouched near the nose gear, running 2 fingers along the strut assembly the same way Raymond had taught him to check a brake caliper, slow and deliberate, trusting his hands before anything else. When he heard the first footstep on the tarmac, he didn't look up right away. He gave himself 3 more seconds. Finished what he was checking, then he stood. She had dressed for this. That was the first thing he registered. Not her face, not the attorney beside her, the coat. Except it wasn't a coat today. It was the dress, deep black, fitted close from shoulder to knee, the neckline sitting just low enough to say intentional without saying desperate. Her heels were low enough for tarmac but high enough to remind you this was not a casual visit. Her hair fell straight past her shoulders, not a strand out of place. Her posture said, "I have already won this." She looked extraordinary. She always had. That had never been the problem. Bernard Holt stepped down behind her from the SUV navy suit. Silver hair swept back, leather portfolio against his ribs like a man who had learned that the weight of paper is its own kind of authority. A younger associate followed, already holding a legal pad, pen already uncapped. Dion did not walk toward them. He stayed where he was on his tarmac in front of his plane and let them walk to him. When Simone got close enough, she smiled. God, that smile. He had loved that smile once. It arrived in the eyes first and made you feel like you were the only person in the room worth looking at. He had built memories around that smile, had believed things because of it. Now he observed it the way Raymond had taught him to observe an unfamiliar engine, with interest, without trust, waiting for it to tell him what it was actually doing. Dion, the old tone, warm like no time had passed and none of it had been ugly. Simone even, nothing given away. Holt stepped forward smoothly, the way attorneys do, like the conversation had always been heading exactly here. He was not brief, he was thorough. He walked through the argument in full, in the measured baritone of a man who has spent 30 years making unreasonable things sound inevitable. The federal contract had been in active negotiation during the final year of the marriage. The aircraft had been acquired using capital that traced. He used that word carefully, traces, to business development activity during the marital period. Under Georgia law, this represented a potentially undisclosed appreciable asset. He used the phrase appreciable asset twice. He let it hang in the air each time. Dion let him finish. Then he said one word. Calvin Ossie stepped out from the far side of the hangar. 52 years old. Dark suit, unhurried. He had been standing there for 14 minutes. He had his own leather portfolio, and he opened it before he reached them, and he addressed Holt the way a man addresses a problem he identified some time ago and has since resolved. The contract in question was executed 16 weeks after the divorce was finalized. The full record of pre-negotiation activity, every communication, every preliminary filing, had been disclosed to opposing counsel during settlement proceedings. All of it documented. All of it dated. He produced a tabbed document and held it out to Holt without ceremony. Any claim to the contrary would be answered in court. Publicly, at whatever cost that proceeding required, he said the at whatever cost part with particular clarity. Holt took the document, opened it, read the first page. Something shifted in his posture. Small, almost invisible. The way its structure settles when the ground beneath it changes. The associate stopped writing. Simone was looking at Calvin with an expression that was working very hard to stay composed. The warmth was leaving her face the way heat leaves a room when the door opens. She hadn't expected Calvin to already be here. She hadn't expected any of this to already be built. Dion waited until he had her eyes. Then he spoke to her directly, not to Holt, not to the associate, to her. "You signed the papers, Simone." His voice was quiet. Level, the voice of a man reading a measurement off a gauge. "You got what the settlement said you were owed. That's done." He let his gaze move to the plane behind him. To the hangar, to all of it, then back to her face. "This is mine." He turned and walked back toward the aircraft. "Calvin will handle the rest." Behind him. Silence, no argument from Holt, no parting warmth from Simone, no sound at all except his own footsteps on the concrete. He did not turn around, he already knew her face. Subscribe right now if you haven't already. Because what Dion finds in the next few hours is to change every single thing you thought you understood about this marriage. Comment below, where are you watching from tonight? The condo was quiet when he got home. He changed out of his work jacket, made coffee he didn't drink, sat down at his desk with the settlement file Calvin had forwarded, the full documentation package organized by date, tabbed by category. Dion went through it the way he went through every audit, page by page in order, looking for the shape of the thing, for where pressure had been applied and where it had been expected to hold. Most of it was what he expected. Holt had been reaching. The contract argument was thin and Calvin had been right that it wouldn't survive contact with a judge. There were a few flagged pages. Dion worked through them steadily. Then he reached the property transaction summary near the back. He stopped, read it once, read it again. Slower, the house in Buckhead, appraised at $625,000 at the time of settlement. Simone had received it as part of the divorce agreement, her choice. She had pushed for it with a particular kind of quiet insistence that her attorney dressed as sentiment. Dion had let her have it. 4 months ago, that house was sold to Darius Caldwell, Simone's brother, for $185,000. The transaction was dated 5 days after Simone signed the divorce papers. Dion set the page down on the desk. He poured himself a glass of water, drank it slowly, set the glass down. He was a logistics man. He had spent the better part of 2 decades tracking the movement of freight, capital, and contracts across systems that looked simple on the surface and revealed their true shape only when you followed every line back to its source. He understood flow. He understood that money doesn't move without a reason, and the reason is always worth finding. A $625,000 asset sold to a family member for $185,000 5 days after the settlement was signed. That was not a family discount. That was a transfer. Which meant the question was not why she sold it cheap. The question was, where did the other $440,000 go? And when did it go there? He picked up his phone and called Renee Patton. She answered on the second ring, which meant she had been waiting for this call. "You saw the property transaction," she said. "Not a question. Talk to me." A pause, the sound of papers moving on the other end of the line, then, "Dion, I've been sitting on something. I didn't want to bring it to you until I had it mapped. After today, another pause, shorter. I think it's time. Go ahead. 2 LLCs, Delaware filings, both registered to addresses connected to the Caldwell family." Her voice was steady, and even in the way it always got when the numbers were showing her something she needed him to understand exactly right. One of them was filed in year 3 of the marriage. Dion was quiet. Year 3. He knew exactly what year 3 looked like. He could still feel it if he reached back far enough. The 14-hour days. The contracts that kept almost tipping into something bigger. The nights he came home tired and she had food on the table and asked him how the meetings went. The weekends. The way she laughed at the right moments. Year 3. Both accounts showed zero activity for a long time, Renee continued. No incoming, no outgoing, nothing that would flag in a routine review. Until the settlement was finalized, Dion said. Yes, he leaned back in his chair, looked at the ceiling, looked at nothing. How much? I'm still mapping it. I want to be certain before I give you a number. 48 hours. All right, his voice was even quiet. Don't talk to anyone else about this. I know, she said. Rennie, I know Dion. He ended the call. Sat without moving for a long time. The documents were spread across the desk in front of him, neat, time-stamped. All the paperwork of a life he had believed was one thing, and was beginning to understand was something else entirely. He did not call Simone. He did not call Calvin. He called his mother. Gloria Webb answered on the third ring. Her voice carried that particular warmth she kept for him only. Low, already paying attention. Hey baby, mama. He let out a slow breath. You got a few minutes? I got all the minutes you need. He told her everything. The hangar that morning. The settlement file. The property transaction. The 2 LLCs. Renee's call. He laid it out in order, the way he laid everything out. No editorializing. Just the facts arranged so the shape of them was visible. She didn't interrupt once. When he finished, the line stayed quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that is not empty. The kind that means someone is actually thinking. Then Gloria said, How long do you think she's been planning this, baby? I don't know yet. His voice was completely level, but I'm going to find out. He stayed on the phone a while longer without saying much, just sitting with her voice in the room. Sometimes that's what a man needs. Not advice, not answers. Just the sound of someone who has known him his whole life and is not going anywhere. He said, Good night. Set the phone face down on the desk. Sat in the dark with the documents still open in front of him. Thinking Renee called back 2 days later. She always called instead of texting when the news was the kind that deserved a voice. I went through the vendor payment records, she said. Cross-referenced them against the state business registration files. Dion set down the routing proposal he'd been reviewing. The primary vendor, the one with the largest invoice volume in years 5 through 7. She paused, not for effect. Renee Patton did not pause for effect. She paused because what she was about to say required him to be ready. It was registered in year 3. He didn't say anything, not year 5, not year 6, when things between them were already cooling, year 3, when the marriage was still intact or appeared to be. When Dion was still in the building phase of his company and trusting her judgment completely because she was his wife, and that was what trust looked like. Who introduced the vendor? He asked. Simone. Personally, she vouched for them, called them a friend of a client. A pause. Dion. Every vendor in the billing system who handled inflated invoices during that period, she introduced all of them. The room was very quiet. He understood the mechanism now. Not all of it, not every detail, but the shape. The way freight moved through a system when someone who understood the system wanted to redirect it. You didn't need to be loud. You didn't need to be obvious. You just needed to be in the right position and patient. She had been patient. I'll have the total figure for you in 24 hours, Renee said. Take the full time. Get it right. I will. He ended the call, stood up, walked to the window. Atlanta at night, ordinary and enormous. Traffic moving on the connector. A delivery truck idling on the corner below. He thought about year 3. About the contracts he was chasing then. About the dinners she had waiting when he came home late. About the Thursday flowers. About the way she had looked at him across a restaurant table when he told her about a deal he'd almost closed and she'd said, I believe in you, and he had believed her believing in him. He thought about all of that. Then he picked up his phone and called Calvin. This isn't just about the settlement, Dion said. Calvin was quiet for exactly 1 second. I know. I need to know who else is in this. I need to understand the full scope of it before we move anything. How long do you need? Dion looked out at the city, at the lights. Give me a week. He never told anyone what the week cost him, not really. Not the true version of it. He went to work every day. He reviewed contracts. He answered emails and took calls and sat in 2 operations meetings and gave his team what they needed from him. From the outside, nothing had changed. On the inside, he was taking apart 11 years and looking at every piece separately. There is something very specific about the grief of understanding. Not discovering that someone hurt you. That part is just pain. But understanding, the slow comprehension of how it was constructed, how long it had been running, how many details had been carefully managed so that you would never see it. That is a different kind of thing. That one lands in a place pain can't reach. He found himself thinking about small moments. The first vendor she introduced him to. A logistics consultant in year 2 of the marriage. Dion had been expanding and she'd mentioned this person casually over dinner. Said they came highly recommended. He'd followed up, used them, never had a reason to look closely. Year 2. Renee called with the final figure on a Friday morning, $231,000, across 4 years. Through 6 vendor relationships, each one introduced personally by Simone, each invoice slightly inflated. Each surplus routed through a consulting account in her name and from there into the Delaware LLCs. $231,000. That was not impulsive. That was not a response to a bad marriage. That was architecture. That was someone who had sat down early and drawn a blueprint and then followed it patiently for years while standing next to him at Saint-Charity galas and dinners tables and holiday gatherings and every other ordinary space where a marriage lives. He read Renee's summary document 3 times. Then he called Calvin. Year 2, Dion said. I saw. She started in year 2. Yes, he said nothing for a moment. Calvin knew better than to fill that silence. All right, Dion said finally. I need you to look into Darius. Not the property transfer. I know what that is. I need to know what deal they're building on top of it. Because this wasn't an exit. It was a destination. And they're not done yet. Calvin, give me 10 days. Dion, you have 7. He ended the call. Stood at his window for a long time. Then he went back to desk and returned to the routing proposal he'd set down an hour ago. Found his place. Read 2 paragraphs. Put his pen down. Picked it up again. Some doors, once you understand what's behind them, you can't stop looking through. He looked through this one every night that week. Every morning. Every quiet moment when his brain wasn't occupied with something else. And the picture that assembled itself piece by piece in the space behind his eyes. It was not the picture of a woman who had fallen out of love and made some bad choices on the way out. It was the picture of someone who had been counting. From the very beginning she had been counting. Renee called again on a Tuesday. Not about numbers this time. Dion. There's something I need to tell you in person. They met at a coffee shop near his office. Mid-morning, half empty, the kind of place where nobody pays attention to other people's conversations. Renee sat down across from him, set a folder on the table, did not open it yet. In year 5, she said, Do you remember signing an authorization document for vendor paperwork? Something that gave Simone sign-off authority while you were traveling? He thought about it. There was something like that. An admin thing. I was going to Dallas for 3 weeks and she offered to handle the vendor invoices that came in while I was gone. He paused. I don't remember the specifics. Renee nodded slowly. The document was a single page, limited scope, reasonable on its face. She opened the folder. She used it 9 times, Dion. Over 2 years. Each time she made a photocopy and adjusted the date and the listed scope of authority slightly. Not forged entirely, just modified. She slid a page across the table. His signature, clear and real, his own handwriting, on a document that had been used 9 times to authorize transactions he had no knowledge of. He looked at it for a long moment, picked up his coffee cup, set it down without drinking. Because here is the thing that most people do not understand about Dion Webb. He does not react to things immediately. He has trained himself not to. Raymond taught him that the first feeling you have about a broken engine is almost never right. The first feeling is fear, or frustration, or the desire to hit something. The second feeling, if you wait long enough, is clarity. He waited, and the clarity that came was this. She hadn't just planned the exit, she had planned it around him. Using his own systems, his own trust, his own signature, she had built her blueprint inside his house while living in it, and she had done it so carefully that for years it looked exactly like a marriage. He closed the folder, looked at Renee across the table. How certain are you about the modification? Completely. I had a document examiner look at 3 of them. He nodded once. Okay, that was all he said. Okay. And then he asked her about the timeline for the Delaware accounts, and they talked through the numbers for another 20 minutes, and then he bade both 2 coffees and walked back to his office. And he sat at his desk, and he looked at his hands. The way Raymond had taught him to look at his hands after working on something that needed to be understood before it could be fixed. His hands knew the truth. They had for a while now. He just needed to figure out what to do with it. Dion Webb was 43 years old. He had built a company from a spare bedroom. He had earned a federal contract through 2 years of patient, invisible work. He had survived a marriage that turned out to be something other than what he thought it was. He was not going to rush this. He picked up his phone, called Calvin. I need to understand what Darius is building, he said. The full structure, the investors, the timeline. Before we move anything. Understood. And Calvin, yeah, don't move anything yet. He set the phone down, pulled the routing proposal back in front of him. Found his place on the page. Outside his window, Atlanta went on being Atlanta. Loud and indifferent, and full of people who had no idea what was being assembled quietly in an office on the 14th floor. He read to the bottom of the page, turned to the next one. His hands were steady. They had always been steady. That was the thing Simone had never understood about him. She had looked at him and seen patience as weakness, quiet as unawareness. She had seen a man who didn't argue and assumed he didn't know. She had been wrong about all 3. And in a few weeks, when the right moment came, in the right room, in front of the right people, she was going to understand exactly how wrong she had been. But not yet. For now, Dion Webb turned to the next page and kept working. Calvin Ossie was not a man who used the word urgent. In 20 years of friendship, Dion had never once heard him say it. Calvin communicated through precision and timing. When he wanted you to move fast, he scheduled things closer together. When something was critical, he called instead of texted. When it was both, he showed up in person without being asked. He showed up on a Monday morning, 7:15, Dion's office. Coffee already in hand, which meant he'd been thinking since before sunrise. We need to build the full timeline, Calvin said. He sat down across the desk without being invited to. Everything, the marriage accounts, the vendors, the LLCs, all are mapped from year 1, not next week. I know, Calvin. Renee joined them 20 minutes later. No greeting, no small talk. She sat down, opened her laptop, and pulled up the shared document thread Calvin had set up on a secure drive 2 days earlier. 3 people in a room with coffee going cold on the desk and a decade of financial records to sort through. It was slow work, careful work. The kind that only makes sense when you are committed to getting it exactly right. Because Dion understood something about this situation that he had not said out loud to either of them. What Simone had built was patient. Architecture does not get dismantled with a crowbar. You take it apart the way it went up, one piece at a time, in order, without announcing yourself until everything is already done. Raymond had taught him that too. Not about fraud, about engines. An engine somebody else put together wrong has to be taken apart in sequence or you make it worse. You resist the urge to yank at the most obvious broken thing. You start at the beginning and work forward. So they started at the beginning, year one of the marriage, clean, nothing unusual. Dion was still in early build mode, working out of a real office now but running lean. Simone was establishing her design practice. The accounts were straightforward. The vendors were people Dion had sourced himself. Year 2, first flag, a logistics consultant, introduced by Simone over a Tuesday dinner, casually, the way she introduced everything casually, because casual was the register that didn't invite scrutiny. Dion had followed up, engaged the consultant, filed the invoices, moved on, he was building, he trusted her judgment. Why wouldn't he? She was his wife. Info for inflation starts here, Renee said. She didn't look up from her screen. Subtle. Each individual invoice is within normal range. But when you pull the aggregate across the year, she turned the laptop so Dion could see the column. The total for this vendor runs about 19% above market rate for the services listed. Dion looked at the number, said nothing. Year 3, second vendor, first LLC filed in Delaware, registered to an address connected to the Caldwell family property in Marietta. The LLC sat dormant, no transactions, no incoming or outgoing funds. Just a structure patient and quiet, waiting for whatever signal it had been built to receive. Year 4, third and fourth vendor relationships. The inflation pattern continuing, each invoice individually unremarkable, together in the aggregate forming something that had a shape. Year 5, second LLC, authorization letter. Year 6, fifth vendor, the money moving slightly faster now. More confident, like someone who has been careful for years and has decided the pattern is established enough to accelerate slightly. Year 7, divorced discussions begin. Both LLCs go quiet again. Dormant, waiting, settlement signed. 5 days later, the Buckhead house transferred to Darius Caldwell for $185,000. Both LLCs activate on the same day, not within the same week, the same day. That was not coincidence. That was a timer going off. Dion sat with the completed timeline in front of him for a long time. The document was 12 pages, tabbed by year. Color-coded by category because Renee color-coded everything. He had it memorized by then. He was not reading it. He was sitting with the scope of it, the years of it. The specific, deliberate patience required to build something like this, inside a marriage, inside a company, inside the daily life of a man who believed he understood what was happening around him. Total, he said. Renee didn't look up. $231,000. Across 4 years, through 6 vendor relationships. $231,000. Not taken in one action. Not taken in a moment of desperation or poor judgment. Taken in increments small enough to pass unnoticed, through channels she had built herself, using people she had selected personally, over 4 years of a marriage that Dion had believed, genuinely and completely, was a real one. He looked at the timeline. He looked at year 2. He thought about the Tuesday dinner when she mentioned the consultant. The way she had said it between the salad and the entree like it was nothing. A friend of a client. Comes highly recommended. You should look into them. He had looked into them. He had hired them. He had never looked closely at the invoices because there was no reason to look closely. She was his wife. Calvin was watching him. Dion knew the look. 20 years of friendship means a man knows when to speak and when to let the silence do its work. The silence did its work. Then Dion said, I need to know what Darius is building on the Buckhead property. Calvin, real estate attorney I know, owes me a conversation. I'll have something by Wednesday. All right. Dion closed the timeline document. Nothing gets filed, nothing gets moved. Not until I understand the complete picture. Renee nodded. Calvin said, agreed, and that was the meeting. 3 people who understood that the right move made at the wrong time is functionally the same as the wrong move. By Wednesday, Calvin knew. Darius Caldwell was converting the Buckhead property, residential units, high-end positioning, aimed at the market that had been moving through that corridor consistently for 3 years. Clean permits, legitimate contractor, professional documentation. The anchor asset, the property, had entered the deal at $185,000 on a parcel appraised at $625,000, which meant the equity cushion built into the project's foundation was not capital Darius had earned or borrowed or raised. It was the gap between what he paid and what the property was actually worth. $440,000 of constructed equity. Created the moment the transaction closed. And Darius was using that equity to attract outside investors. How far along is the capital raise? Dion asked. Early stage. He has an investor dinner planned, looking to bring in 6 to 8 partners to complete the funding. Calvin paused. He needs outside capital to close. Without it, the deal falls apart. Dion leaned back. So that was the destination, not just extract from the marriage. Not just take the house below value. Build a development project on the foundation of what they had taken. Attract real money from real people who had no idea the anchor asset had been transferred out of a divorce settlement at a fraction of its value. No idea that the equity they were buying into had been manufactured. No idea that the man whose marriage had funded this entire structure had never been told he was funding anything. When is the dinner? He's moving fast. My read is 2 weeks, maybe slightly less. 2 weeks. Dion looked at Calvin steadily. Set up a lunch with Darius. Calvin blinked, once, which for Calvin was the equivalent of a full stop. Say that again. Call him. Tell him I'm looking at investment opportunities in Atlanta real estate. Tell him I remembered he was active in the market and wanted to pick his brain. A pause. You want to have lunch with the man who bought your house for $185,000. I want to know what he's going to walk into that dinner room and say. Dion's voice was even, unhurried. I can't shape what I don't understand, and I want to hear it from him directly. Calvin looked at him for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone. Darius Caldwell arrived at the restaurant 3 minutes late, which Dion noted and filed. Not rude enough to be disrespectful. Just late enough to communicate that his time had value. A calculated 3 minutes. He was broad across the shoulders, easy with his smile. He wore a new suit, not expensive, but new in the way that announced itself. He shook Dion's hand with both of his. Dion, man, you look good. Dion's smile open, the kind that gave nothing away. Darius, good to see you. Sit down, they ordered. Darius got a ribeye without looking at the menu, which told Dion he had been here before, or wanted to project that he had. Dion ordered salmon and waters and settled into the posture of a man who was interested and unhurried and had money to put somewhere if the right conversation happened. Because a comfortable man talks. A man who thinks he's the smartest person at the table talks even more. Dion asked about the Atlanta market, cap rates, zoning timelines. What kinds of plays were generating real returns in the current environment? He asked the questions an interested investor asks. Not too specific, not too eager. The kind of questions that say I'm listening and I have the capacity to act. Darius answered all of them with the ease of a man whose pitch language had been smoothed by repetition. Smart money, ground floor, long runway, the phrases arrived pre-packaged. Dion recognized the pattern. It was the same way freight brokers talked when they were selling capacity they weren't sure they had. He nodded at the right moments, asked a follow-up. Let Darius feel the rhythm of a conversation going well. Between the appetizers and the entree, Darius leaned back in his chair, took a long pull from his drink and said it. The thing Dion had come to hear. I've actually got a project moving right now. Development play I've been working on for a while. Yeah? Casual, interested, not hungry. Residential conversion. Buckhead corridor. The numbers are clean on this one, really clean. What's anchoring it? Darius reached for his drink, something moved across his face. A calculation fast and private there, and gone in under a second. Then the smile came back. Property on Buckhead Lane. Family acquisition. He said it the way you say something when you've decided it's fine. When you've asked yourself a quick question and answered it before the words came out. Came in at a strong basis. That's what makes the returns work. Dion looked at him, open, receptive. The face of a man hearing an opportunity and turning it over. Not the face of a man who had seen the appraisal report. Not the face of a man who knew that family acquisition meant his former home, purchased from his former wife, 5 days after she signed their divorce papers, for less than 30 cents on the dollar. Sounds like you've got real equity from the jump, Dion said. Darius smiled wider. That's exactly right. When the check came, Dion picked it up without discussion. Send me the prospectus when it's ready, he said, pulling on his jacket. I want to look at the numbers. Darius's face did something close to relief. Absolutely, I'll get that to you this week. They shook hands at the door. Warm, easy. Darius walked to the valet with the stride of a man who thought he had just found the right investor at the right moment. Dion walked to his own car. Got in, sat without starting the engine. Atlanta traffic moved past the parking structure exit. Ordinary Wednesday afternoon, delivery trucks. A city bus running behind schedule. He had known, walking into that lunch, what Darius was going to say. He had not known how it would feel to hear it said. With that ease, that comfort, that complete absence of any awareness that the man across the table had spent the better part of 2 decades building the thing they had been drawing from. He sat with it for 4 minutes. Then he texted Calvin. "I have what I needed." He started the car and drove back to his office. He told himself that the authorization letter would not be the thing that broke him. He was wrong, not broke. That is not the right word for what happened. But it came closer than anything else had. Renee called on a Thursday afternoon. Her voice had the quality it only when she was carrying something she didn't want to hand over but knew she had to. "There's something in year 5 I need to walk you through." He closed his office door, sat down. The authorization letter, the one you signed giving Simone sign-off authority on vendor paperwork while you were traveling. He thought back. A 1-page document. An administrative convenience. He was going to Dallas for 3 weeks, a critical period for a freight contract he was trying to close, and she had offered to handle the vendor invoices that came in while he was away. It had made sense. She knew the vendors. She understood the company's systems by then. He was going to be unreachable for stretches. It was a practical solution. I remember it. She used it 9 times, Renee said. Not during the 3 weeks you were in Dallas, over 2 years. Each time, she made a photocopy and adjusted the date and the listed scope of authorization. Not a complete forgery, just modified enough to function for that specific transaction. He said nothing. I had a document examiner look at 3 of them. He was unambiguous about the modifications. "Send me the scan." His phone buzzed. He opened the file, his signature, clear and real, his own handwriting, the way he had always written his name, the slight forward lean of the D, the way the N at the end came up instead of down. On a document that had been photocopied and adjusted and used 9 times to authorize transactions he had never seen. He read it once. Then he set his phone face down on the desk. And he sat there. Here is the thing about Dion Webb that most people do not understand. He is not a man who performs composure. He does not suppress things and pretend they aren't there. He processes them. Fully, he lets the weight of something land completely before he decides what to do about it. So he let this one land, his own signature, his own trust, his own administrative convenience on a Thursday before a Dallas trip. All of it turned into a component of something he had known nothing about. She had not just built a structure around his company. She had used him as a load-bearing element of it. His name, his credibility, his instinct to extend trust to the person he had built a life beside. That was what the authorization letter was. Not just fraud, an inversion. She had taken the evidence of his trust and used it to build the mechanism of his loss. He stood up, walked to the window. Atlanta outside, ordinary Thursday. A courier on a bicycle threading between stopped cars. A woman on the corner across the street waiting for a light, checking her phone. He stood there for a while. And for the first time since this entire thing began, he considered stopping, not forgiving, not forgetting, just stopping, filing the civil claim, recovering what could be recovered, and walking away from the rest. Walking away from the full exposure, from the investor dinner, from the elaborate and patient work of assembling the complete truth in the right room at the right moment. Because here is what nobody tells you about building a case against someone you used to love. It is not the anger that wears you down. Anger is fuel. It burns clean and it keeps you moving. What wears you down is the accumulation of understanding. Each new piece of information is not just evidence. It is also a revision of memory. Every document he read rewrote something he had believed. And there are only so many rewrites a person can absorb if something in them wants to simply stop reading. He stood at that window for a long time. Thought about year 5, about Dallas. About coming home from 3 weeks of grinding work, and she had met him at the door and there had been dinner on the table, and she had asked about the contract and genuinely seemed to care about the answer. That had been real, or it had felt real. He was no longer certain he could trust his own memory of what was real, which was the most disorienting thing of all. His phone rang. "Calvin," he answered without turning from the window. "Calvin, you saw the scan?" "Yeah." A pause. Not a long one. Calvin knew when to let things breathe and when not to. "Dion, document modification with financial intent changes the category. This is not civil territory anymore." I've spoken to a federal fraud attorney, preliminary conversation, nothing on record yet. Dion said nothing. What do you want to do? He looked at the courier on the bicycle, now half a block further down the street, already gone from where he had been, moving forward without appearing to think about it. He thought about Raymond, about the shop, about the engines that were put together wrong. About a lesson that the urge to stop in the middle of a job and walk away is almost always the wrong urge. Not because finishing is always right, but because stopping in the middle means leaving something broken in a way that will cause problems later that you cannot predict from where you're standing now. He thought about what would happen if he stopped here. Simone and Darius would fold the LLCs, move the money. The investors at that dinner would put their capital into a project built on equity extracted from his marriage and never know it. The fraud would be complete, not punished. Calvin, yeah. If I stop now, does she face anything real? Calvin was quiet for exactly 1 second. Not much. Dion turned from the window, walked back to his desk, sat down, picked up his phone and looked at the scan of the authorization letter one more time. His signature, his name, used against him 9 times without his knowledge. Then we don't stop, he said. His voice was level. Not charged, not resolved in any cinematic way. Just decided. The way decisions sound when they come from the part of a person that does not perform deciding. Give me what I need on the investor dinner. Timeline, venue, attendee list if you can get it. I'll have something by Monday. A pause. One name already on the list. Jerome Patton. Retired justice consultant, 61 years old, spent 40 years doing due diligence on other people's deals before touching his own money. I know him peripherally. You've met him twice, maybe 3 times, at industry events. Dion was quiet for a moment. He hasn't committed yet? Not yet. Which means he's still watching. Keep watching him. And Calvin, yeah, nobody moves anything yet. He ended the call, sat at his desk, pulled the freight routing proposal back in front of him and found his place on page 7. The work did not stop because other things were hard. That was the thing about having built something real. It kept demanding your attention. And that demand, as it turned out, was not a burden. It was a lifeline. Something to return to, something that needed him in a straightforward way that the rest of this did not. He read to the bottom of the page. Turned to the next one. Phyllis Odom called on a Tuesday afternoon, her name on his screen at 2:17 p.m. Dion had not spoken to her in over 2 years. The vendor relationship had simply ended. No final conversation, no explanation, no transition, just silence from his end where there used to be a working relationship. He answered, Phyllis. Dion, her voice carried the weight of someone who has been holding something longer than it was comfortable to hold. I need to tell you something. I should have told you a while ago, but I didn't understand what I was looking at until recently. He leaned back, said nothing. Let her find a way in, she said. 3 years ago, Simone had come to see her. In person, Phyllis's office, sat down across the desk with the posture she always had, back straight, hands folded, looking like a woman who had come to discuss an ordinary business matter. She had sent someone ahead of her. A younger woman Phyllis assumed was an assistant, and that woman had handled the introductions and most of the paperwork conversation before Simone stepped in at the end. Phyllis had seen her face for maybe 4 minutes total, close enough to say no, not long enough to be certain she'd recognize her again. She had a folder, invoice documents. She wanted Phyllis to sign off on some adjusted billing for services rendered to Ellison Freight. Minor adjustments, she said. Routine reconciliation. Phyllis had looked at the numbers, then at Simone, then back at the numbers. I told her no, Phyllis said. I told her I wasn't going to put my name on something that didn't reflect work we actually did. What did she say? Nothing. She closed the folder, thanked me for my time, left. Dion was quiet. 2 weeks later, your office stopped returning my calls. The contract went quiet. No explanation, no final conversation. I reached out twice and heard nothing back. She paused. I thought it was a business decision. I thought maybe you'd found someone with a lower rate or a better fit. It didn't occur to me that she had done it, that she had cut me off because I wouldn't cooperate. Silence on the line, not the empty kind. The kind where 2 people are sitting with the same understanding, arriving at the same time from different directions. Phyllis, yeah. Why are you calling now? Because I read about the hangar situation. About her showing up with a lawyer, a pause. And because I should have called you 3 years ago when I saw what she was asking me to do. I didn't because I told myself it wasn't my place, and I've been thinking about that ever since. He exhaled slowly through his nose. You did the right thing, he said. 3 years ago, in your office, you did the right thing, I know. Her voice was dry. Not bitter, just honest. It didn't cost me much at the time. I had other clients. It cost you, Dion said. The contract was worth something. She made sure you paid for saying no. Phyllis was quiet for a moment. I know that now. Thank you for calling. He ended the call, sat at his desk without moving, because this was the piece that completed the picture, not the numbers. Not the LLC filings or the modified authorization letters or the vendor invoice inflation. This, she had filtered. She had gone through her network, her contacts, her connections, the people she knew or could reach, and she had identified who would cooperate and who wouldn't. She had approached Phyllis Odom, 8-year vendor partner, someone with genuine proximity to Dion's company, and when Phyllis said no, she had not moved on and accepted the limitation. She had eliminated her. She had curated the people around his company the way you curate a guest list, selecting for compliance, removing anyone who might create a problem, building a closed system with no internal friction. The vendors who stayed, the 6 who ran the invoices, were not people who had simply agreed to be part of something dishonest. They were people who had passed a test Dion had never known was being administered. Narrator, she hadn't just stolen from him, she had rebuilt the entire room around him so he couldn't see the walls. He got up, made coffee, let the act of making it occupy his hands for a few minutes. Then he called Calvin. I need Phyllis Odom in that investor dinner room, he said. Calvin, walk me through it. She turned Simone down 3 years ago. Simone cut her immediately after. There's no visible connection between Phyllis and my company at this point. The contract went cold 2 years before the divorce. Nobody would recognize her as someone with a stake in this. A pause. She goes in as a potential investor, and when the moment comes, she's the first face Simone sees. Calvin was quiet for a moment, then, that's not litigation. That's something else. Can you make it work? Let me call her. He called back 40 minutes later. She said yes, Calvin said, without needing much convincing. I explained what the evening would look like and what she'd be asked to do. She listened to all of it. A pause. Then she said she'd been waiting 3 years to be in a room where saying no to Simone Caldwell cost that woman something. Dion sat with that for a moment. All right, he said. What's the timeline on the dinner? Darius booked the venue, Meridian Club, Midtown, 11 days from today. 11 days. That was the number Dion fixed in his mind. Not 3 weeks, not 2 weeks. 11 days, which was 10 days of preparation and 1 day of execution, and he was going to treat all 11 of them the way Raymond had taught him to treat the last stage of an engine rebuild. Careful, sequential, no shortcuts into the final stretch because the final stretch is where shortcuts become disasters. I'll have the counter documented ready in 5 days, Renee said when he called her next. Full timeline, all 6 vendors, LLC registration records, the authorization letter analysis, the property transaction, the financial summary. Tabbed. Days, Dion said. A beat. 4 days, she confirmed. Ticking clock, 11 days to the dinner. She called on a Thursday evening Simone. Her name on his screen at 7:43 p.m. Dion looked at it through 2 full rings. He thought about what this call was. Not what it would sound like, what it was. She had come to the hangar and found a wall. Calvin with 47 pages and a federal disclosure record that collapsed Holt's argument in 4 minutes. And now, weeks later, she was calling. Not because she wanted to reconcile, not because she felt genuine remorse, because she needed information. She needed to know whether that wall had softened, whether he was angry or settled, whether he knew something or suspected something, or had simply moved on. This was reconnaissance dressed as an apology. He answered on the 3rd ring. Simone, hey, the voice she used when she wanted to sound unguarded, soft at the edges, something underneath it that was designed to feel like honesty. Is this a bad time? No, go ahead. She took a breath, audible, measured, the kind that announces something that has been rehearsed. I wanted to call and say I'm sorry for showing up at the hangar like that. A pause with exactly the right amount of weight. That wasn't fair to you. Holt pushed for it and I let him. It was the wrong move. I appreciate that. The marriage, it wasn't all your fault. Her voice shifted into something softer, quieter. I know I had a part in what went wrong. There were things I could have done differently. I think that's probably true, Dion said. He kept his voice warm, level. The voice of a man who had found some peace about the whole thing and arrived somewhere settled. And here is the part that did not show in his voice. The thing underneath the leveled tone. He was sitting at his kitchen table, the lamp in the corner. The routing documents from earlier still on the table beside him. And he was listening to the voice of a woman he had loved for real, for years, before he understood that what he was loving was partly a performance. That did not make the love retroactively false. That was the hard thing. The love had been real, his love. He had felt it genuinely and completely. And hearing her voice on a Thursday evening in his kitchen, even knowing what he knew now, there was something in the register of it that landed in a place that had not finished grieving yet. He did not let that show. He let her finish. "I just hope we can be civil going forward," she said. "I don't want there to be bad blood between us." "There's no bad blood on my end." His voice was easy, natural. "I think it's good you called. Life's too short for all of that. We both have things we're building." She exhaled, real relief or a very good impression of it. "I'm really glad to hear you say that. Take care of yourself, Simone. You too, Dion." He sat with the phone in his hand after the call ended. Just sat with it, not analyzing, not cataloging, just sitting in his kitchen with the lamp in the corner and the city outside his window, and the voice of a woman who had been his wife for 11 years still faintly in the room. He allowed himself exactly that much. Then he set the phone down on the table, picked it up again, typed Calvin a message. 4 words she just called move. He set the phone face down. Looked at the routing documents on the table, picked one up, looked at the first line, put it back down, stood up, walked to the window, stood there for a while looking at nothing in particular. The night, the lights, the ordinary continuous movement of a city that did not know or care what was being assembled quietly in an apartment on a Thursday evening. Then he walked back to the table, sat down, picked up the routing document again, found the first line, read it and kept reading. The counter document arrived from Renee on Sunday evening, 41 pages, tabbed by category, color-coded by year. Dion printed it at his home office, sat down with it at 9 p.m. and read through every pay order, though not reviewing. He had been over all of it before in pieces, in separate conversations and separate documents and separate phone calls spread across weeks. This was the first time he had seen the complete picture assembled in one place. It was different seeing it whole. Page 1. Vendor registration dates, cross-referenced against the year of the marriage. 6 vendors, first registration year 2. Dion and Simone had been married 14 months when she introduced that first consultant. Page 8. The LLC filing records, 2 entities, Delaware registration. Family address in Marietta. Filed in years 2 and 4, dormant for years. Activated simultaneously on the same day within hours of the settlement being signed. Page 17. The authorization letter analysis. The document examiner's findings. 3 exhibits, each one showing the original page and the modified copy beside it, differences highlighted in the margins. The adjustments were subtle, a change date, a slightly broader scope of authority, small enough to pass a casual review, deliberate enough to function. Page 29. The vendor invoice aggregate, year by year, inflation percentages, total surplus extracted per vendor per year. Running total at the bottom of each page, accumulating toward the final figure on page 36, $231,000. Page 37, the property transaction appraisal, sale record, date comparison, 5 days. Page 40, the development project overview, the connection between the property transfer price and the equity structure of Darius's deal, how the artificial basis created the investor pitch, what those investors would be told and what they would not be told. Page 41, summary. He read the summary twice. Then he closed the document, looked at his hands on the table. His Uncle Raymond used to say that the last check before you close an engine is the most important one. Not because you're likely to find something new at that point. Because you need to be certain. Because once you close it, you have to trust what's inside it completely. And trust built on a check you didn't fully make is not real trust. He opened the document again, read the summary a 3rd time. Then he called Calvin. "It's complete," he said. "I know, Renee sent me a copy, the federal fraud attorney. Already briefed. He reviewed Renee's summary this afternoon. He's ready." Dion was quiet for a moment. Jerome Patton, he's still holding, called me Friday, asked if he should be worried. I told him to hold and that you'd explain everything soon. A pause, he said, and I'm quoting directly, Tell Webb I trust him more than I trust good numbers, and I have trusted good numbers my whole life. Something in Dion's chest shifted, small, quiet. The kind of thing that doesn't have a name. Phyllis is confirmed, he said. Called her this morning to make sure. She said she'll be there. Calvin's voice carried something that might in anyone else have been called satisfaction. She also said to tell you she ironed her blazer twice. First time she ironed anything twice in 10 years. Dion almost smiled. Almost. All right, 4 days, Calvin said. 4 days, Dion said. He ended the call. Sat at his desk in the quiet of his home office, the printed counter document in front of him, the lamp throwing its small circle of light over the table. 4 days. He thought about everything that had been built in the past weeks, the timeline, the documentation, the careful, patient assembly of the complete picture. The 41 pages that said, in the plain language of dates and dollar amounts and recorded transactions, exactly what had happened and actually when it had started. He thought about Phyllis Odom ironing her blazer twice. He thought about Jerome Patton saying trust. He thought about Calvin showing up at 7:15 on a Monday morning with coffee already in hand because he had been thinking since before sunrise. And he thought about something his mother had said to him once, a long time ago, when he was 17. And had just found out that a friend he trusted had lied to him about something that mattered. She had said, the people who show up for you when you don't ask them to, those are the ones you carry forward. Everything else you leave where it fell. He looked at the 41 pages on his desk, at the work that had been done, carefully and quietly, by people who had not been asked to care as much as they cared. He was not alone in this room. He had never been alone in it. That was the thing Simone had not calculated for. She had built her plan around Dion, around his trust, his signature, his vendors, his company. She had accounted for his patience, his tendency not to react immediately, his focus on the work in front of him. She had not accounted for Calvin Ossie. She had not accounted for Renee Patton. She had not accounted for Phyllis Odom, who had said no in a quiet office 3 years ago, and then waited, without knowing she was waiting, for a moment to mean something. She had not accounted for any of them. Because when you look at someone and see only what they can give you and what you can take from them, you don't see the people standing beside them. You see the resource. You miss the community. Dion Webb had spent the better part of 2 decades building a company, and somewhere in the process of that, without announcement, without ceremony, he had built something else too. A group of people who showed up. He picked up the counter document, slid it into the folder Calvin had left for it, wrote 1 word on the tab in his own handwriting. Ready. 4 days. The morning of the dinner, Dion woke up at 5. Not because his alarm went off, because he was done sleeping. His body knew the difference between a day that was ordinary and a day that was not. And this one was not. He made coffee. Real coffee, the kind that takes time, not the kind you press a button for. He stood at the counter and watched it brew and listened to the sound of it and did not think about the evening ahead. Not yet. There would be time for that. Right now there was just the coffee and the kitchen and the early Atlanta light coming through the window at an angle that made the counter glow faintly copper. He had learned that from Raymond too. The morning of something important, you do ordinary things first. You let your hands be useful before you ask your mind to carry anything heavy. You make the coffee. You wash the cup from yesterday. You check the small things. Because the small things are what keep you grounded when the large things arrive. He drank the coffee standing up, washed the cup, put it away. Then he got dressed. Calvin arrived at 7:15, no greeting at the door. He walked in the way he had walked into Dion's spaces for 20 years, like a man who had standing permission and didn't need to announce himself. He sat down at the kitchen table, set his portfolio flat in front of him, and opened it. Counter document is printed, 4 copies, tabbed by category. He turned the first copy toward Dion. Appraisal report on top, transaction record behind it, financial summary with the full timeline last. Dion sat across from him, looked at the stack, did not touch it yet. Phyllis confirmed, last night. She knows what she's there to do. She knows when to speak and what to say. Calvin paused. She asked me to tell you something. What? She said she's been waiting 3 years to say no to something in that woman's direction, and she's glad she finally gets to mean it in public. Dion almost smiled. Almost Jerome Patton, he said. He's still holding, hasn't signed anything. Called me Tuesday to ask if he should be worried. Calvin looked at him steadily. I told him to hold and that you'd explain everything soon. And I'm quoting, "Tell Webb I trust him more than I trust the numbers, and I've trusted good numbers my whole life." Dion looked down at the table for a moment. There are things that land differently when you are in the middle of something hard. Small gestures that would go unnoticed in ordinary time but arrive like something solid when you need solid. Jerome Patton, who barely knew him, who had simply decided to wait based on a single request passed through a mutual friend, who had trusted him without knowing the full reason why. That was not nothing. "All right," Dion straightened. "Walk me through the evening." Calvin laid it out. Meridian Club, Midtown. Private dining room on the second floor. Darius had reserved it 10 days ago. 11 guests confirmed, 8 who had indicated preliminary interest, 3 who were undecided. The presentation was scheduled for 8 o'clock. Cocktail hour at 7. Phyllis would arrive with the other guests. Calvin would enter during the question period, which Darius always built in at the end of a pitch. The man liked a room that felt collaborative. It made investors feel like participants rather than targets. That was going to work against him tonight. "You're not going," Calvin said. It was not a question. "No, good." Calvin closed his portfolio. "This doesn't need you in the room. It needs the documents." Dion nodded. Because that was the thing he had understood from the beginning of all of this. His presence would have made it personal. His face in that room would have given Simone something to perform against. An audience for her composure. A target for whatever version of herself she would have assembled for the occasion. Without him, there was nothing to perform against. There was only the truth sitting in 41 tabbed pages on a dinner table in Midtown Atlanta, in a room full of people who had come to hear about an investment opportunity and were about to hear something else entirely. The truth didn't need Dion Webb to deliver it. It just needed space, and Calvin Osei and Phyllis Odom. And the right 6:45, Dion drove to his mother's house in East Point. He had not told Gloria he was coming. He rarely did. She always seemed to expect him anyway. She opened the door before he reached the porch steps, looked at his face, said nothing, turned and walked back toward the kitchen. He followed. She put water on. Not coffee this time. Tea, she did slowly, the way she made everything, and she set a cup in front of him and sat down across the table and folded her hands. They sat in silence for a moment. Her kitchen, the same table, the same chairs, or near enough to them. The small lamp in the corner that she kept on all evening because she didn't like overhead light. A bowl of oranges on the counter. A library book on the side table with a cloth bookmark tucked in. "Tonight?" she said. "Tonight." She nodded once, looked at her tea. "Are you ready?" Dion wrapped both hands around his cup, felt the warmth of it, thought about the question honestly. "I've been ready for a while," he said. "I just had to wait for the right moment. And this is it. This is it." Gloria looked at him with the particular expression she had when she was about to say something that mattered. Not the expression of a woman who was about to offer comfort. The expression of a woman who had watched her son for 43 years and knew exactly what he needed to hear. "Your Uncle Raymond used to say a man who moves before the other person has committed to their position is a man who tips his hand." She paused. "He also said the best moves don't like moves. They look like the other person just ran out of places to stand." Dion held her gaze. "She ran out," he said quietly. "Then let it be done," Gloria said. "And don't look back at it." He finished his tea, stayed a while longer, not saying much. The refrigerator hummed. A car went past outside. Gloria got up once to adjust the lamp in the corner and sat back down. At 7:30 he stood up, kissed the top of her head and walked to the door. "Call me," she said, "not a question." When it said, he drove back toward the city. He did not go to Meridian. He went to his office, sat at his desk, turned his lamp on, pulled a freight routing proposal from the stack he'd been working through all week and found his place on page 7 and read, or tried to read. His phone sat face up on the corner of the desk. He was not watching it, but he was aware of it the way you are aware of a door when you're waiting for someone to knock. He read 4 paragraphs, reread the third one, put the proposal down, picked it up again, decided to just let himself wait. At Meridian, Simone arrived at 6:50, 10 minutes before cocktail hour. She always arrived before the event officially began. She needed to walk a room before other people were in it, to understand its dimensions, to decide where she would stand and where she would move and how she would use the geography of it. The room was exactly what she had expected. Walnut paneling, Soft overhead light, warm and flattering, the kind that made everyone look like better versions of themselves. A long rectangular table set for 12. White flowers at the center, small arrangement, tasteful without being fussy. Good crystal, good linen. She had chosen well. She walked the perimeter slowly, touched the back of one chair. Checked the sight lines from the presentation screen to the head of the table. Adjusted one of the place cards 2 inches to the left. Then she stood at the window. Atlanta below. The lights of Midtown scattered across the dark. She had stood at a lot of windows in her life and looked out at cities and felt the specific satisfaction of a woman who knew what she was doing and was doing it well. Tonight was the culmination of years of careful, patient work. Tonight, the deal closed. Darius arrived at 7. His suit was the best one he owned, which Simone had selected 2 weeks ago and taken to the tailor herself. He looked good. He looked like a man whose project you would trust. He kissed her cheek. "How are we feeling?" she said. She meant it completely. The guests arrived between 7 and 7:20. 8 men, 3 women, most in their 50s, all of them with money to deploy and the specific confidence that comes from having deployed it successfully before. Jerome Patton arrived at 7:12, gray suit, gold-framed glasses, and the quiet demeanor of a man who had been to enough of these evenings to know not to commit anything before the dessert course. Phyllis Odom arrived at 7:18. Navy blazer, simple jewelry, the kind of woman who enters a room and doesn't perform entering it. She accepted a glass of water from the server, declined the wine, and found a seat near the far end of the table. Simone moved through the cocktail hour with the ease of someone born to it. She remembered names. She asked about things people had mentioned in passing months ago and watched faces register that she had remembered. She was extraordinary at this. She had always been extraordinary at this. She did not look at Phyllis Odom. She did not look at her because she did not recognize her. Not yet. Darius began at 8 o'clock. He was good. Better than Simone had expected, which meant the 14 rehearsals had done their work. He walked the room through the property, the location, the zoning, the projected residential build-out. His numbers were clean. His projected return was conservative enough to sound credible and strong enough to sound worth the call. He clicked through his slides with the practiced rhythm of a man who had internalized the material. He made eye contact at the right moments. He paused for emphasis without pausing so long that the room lost the thread. Simone watched the faces around the table. 3 of the undecideds were leaning in. The deal was going to close, she could feel it. Then Darius said, "I'm happy to open it up for questions, the floor is yours." And Phyllis Odom set her water glass down. "I have one," she said. Her voice was unhurried, the voice of a woman who had been waiting for a specific moment and had arrived at it. "Can you walk me through how the anchor property was acquired? Specifically, the gap between the appraised value and the purchase price." Something changed in the room, not loudly. Rooms don't change loudly at moments like this. They go still. The specific stillness of people who are recalibrating without showing that they are recalibrating. Darius said, "Sure, the property was a family acquisition. Came in at a favorable basis. The appraised value," Phyllis said, "was $625,000. Not a question, a statement." She reached into her bag, set a document on the table, slid it to the center without looking at who was picking it up. Appraisal report, property address, dollar figure at the top, clear and unambiguous. The room had gone very still. Simone looked at the document, and then she looked at the woman who had placed it there. And she recognized her. Phyllis Odom, the vendor who had said no. The woman she had written out of Dion's company 2 years ago, with a single quiet instruction and no explanation. The woman she had assumed was simply gone. The woman who had no reason to be in this room except she was in this room, which meant the door opened. Calvin Ossie walked in, dark suit, unhurried, 41 pages in a tabbed folder that he set down on the table in front of him before he had fully taken his seat. He looked at Darius, then at the room. Then he placed 3 documents on the table in a row, one after the other, with the deliberate care of a man who has been waiting a long time to set them down. First, the appraisal report, $5,000, property, address. Second, the transaction record, SIM address, 25,508, buyer to Darius Oaks Caldwell, date 5 after a divorce settlement was signed. Third, the financial summary, 41 pages, vendor names, invoice dates, LLC account numbers, wire transfer records, a total figure near the bottom, underlined, $231,000, a timeline spanning 4 years. Calvin's voice was even. He addressed the room. Not Simone, not Darius, the room. The anchor asset for this development project was acquired through a transaction structured to convert marital equity into private investment capital at less than 30% of its appraised value. The capital used to build out the investment structure over the preceding 4 years was extracted from a logistics company through falsified vendor relationships and modified authorization documents. The full documentation is in front of you. He paused. Every person at this table is now materially connected to those facts. I would strongly recommend that each of you speak with your own attorney before this evening concludes. The room did not erupt. It went airless. The specific airless quality of 11 people simultaneously rereading 40 minutes of information through a completely different lens. Jerome Patton, at the far end of the table, reached across and quietly requested a copy of the financial summary. The woman beside him did the same. Neither of them looked at Simone when they asked. Darius turned toward his sister. When he said her name, it came out wrong. Like a word he didn't recognize. Simone. She didn't look at him. She was looking at the 3 documents laid out on the table, the appraisal, the transaction record, the summary with the timeline running all the way back to year 2. Her year 2. Dion's year 2. The year he was still working 14-hour days and bringing her flowers on Thursday nights. Her face had not moved, but something behind it had. For the first time in a very long time, Simone Caldwell-Webb was looking at the full shape of what had been built against her. Not a threat, not a legal maneuver, the complete architecture of it. Patient, precise, built over weeks, the same way she had built her own plan over years, and she understood, with complete and sudden clarity, exactly whose hands had built it. Dion's phone buzzed at 9:47. Calvin, 2 words. It's done. He read it, set the phone back down, looked at the routing proposal on his desk, found page 7 again. Read the paragraph he'd been rereading for 2 hours. This time it went in. Darius cooperated within 72 hours. Not because he wanted to, because the alternative was worse and he was smart enough to do the math quickly. He had been a participant in a transaction that Calvin's federal fraud attorney had now characterized in terms that nobody wanted associated with their name. He handed over everything. Text messages going back 2 years. Emails. And a voice memo. One Simone had sent him as a reminder about wire transfer timing, the kind of message you send when you trust the recipient completely and aren't thinking about what a recording sounds like to someone outside the conversation. Darius had kept it in his phone the way people keep things they don't know they'll need. He hadn't solved it as evidence. He had saved it because he hadn't gotten around to deleting it. Her voice, clear and real, talking through the timing of the deal, the property transfer, when to move the LLC funds, how to position the development project to look like something that had been built after the marriage ended. There was a second voice in the memo, Bernard Holt, Simone's divorce attorney. He had been on the call, not leading it, not initiating, but present, and silent about what he knew when he should not have been silent. When Calvin played that memo for the federal fraud attorney, the attorney listened to it twice. Then he called the State Bar of Georgia. Holt withdrew from all involvement within 48 hours. His letter cited a conflict of interest. 3 words that covered a great deal of ground and explained nothing. 2 of the investors who had attended the Meridian dinner called Calvin directly to ask what they should do. He gave them the name of a civil attorney and told them they had not signed anything binding yet, which was the important thing. Jerome Patton called Dion directly. "I'm guessing," Jerome said, "that biscuit you owe me just turned into a full dinner." Dion almost laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in a long time. "Yes," he said. "It did. The deal collapsed the way careful structures always collapse when the foundation is removed. Not loudly, quietly at first, then all at once. 3 of the investors retained their own attorneys. All 3 withdrew. The 4th never responded to Darius' follow-up calls. Without the committed investor capital, the project had no path forward. The permitting was suspended. The contractor walked within 10 days of not receiving a scheduled payment. The prospectus Darius had spent weeks pottling and Calvin had spent one evening dismantling became a document that existed only as an exhibit in a legal file. Darius cycled through 2 attorneys in 3 weeks. Neither of them liked what they saw. The second one told him plainly what cooperation would look like versus what a trial would look like. And Darius was a man who understood leverage. He had built his career on it. He knew when he was on the wrong side of it. Simone went through 3 attorneys. The first lasted 2 weeks before citing a conflict. The second lasted less. The third was a woman out of a firm in Decatur named Carolyn Voss, who sat Simone down at a conference table and told her the honest version of what the evidence looked like and what a trial would cost her in every dimension. Not just financial, reputation, record. The permanent, searchable, public kind of record that surfaces in any background check or due diligence process run by anyone with a reason to look. Simone listened and did not argue. She came to his door on a Wednesday morning, alone, no attorney, no preparation in the way she usually prepared, jeans, dark, a black jacket. Her hair still straight, it was always straight, but not set the way she set it for the world. Just her hair, just her face in the early light. She looked tired. Not the dramatic kind of tired people perform, the real kind. The kind that comes from weeks of sleeping badly and carrying something heavy and knowing it isn't going to get lighter. Dion stepped back from the door. She walked in. She didn't sit down. She stood in the living room with her arms slightly away from her sides, which was the closest she ever got to not knowing what to do with herself. That was an ambush. Her voice was controlled, but only barely. You had Calvin in that room. You had that woman there. You set all of it up and you let it happen in front of 11 people. She moved as she talked, not pacing, but she couldn't stand still. You could have called me. You could have picked up the phone. You had questions about the house, about Darius, about whatever you found. You could have come to me directly instead of walking into a dinner and blowing it apart in public like. Are you finished? Not sharp, not cold, just a question. Even and quiet, she stopped. He pulled out a chair from the kitchen table and sat down, did not invite her to sit, did not raise his voice. Just folded his hands on the table and looked at her. The way a man looks at something he has fully understood and does not need to perform understanding of. Sit down if you want, he said, but either way I'm going to walk through this. She stood arms crossed, jaw set. He started at the beginning, year 2. The first vendor. A logistic consultant she had introduced over dinner, casually, the way she introduced everything casually, because casual was the register that didn't ask for scrutiny. He had been working 14-hour days and expanding as fast as he could manage, and he had trusted her judgment because she was his wife, and that was what trust looked like. He walked through the invoicing structure, how it worked, how subtle it was, how it was built by someone who understood his company's billing system because she had been watching him run it for years. The Delaware LLCs, filed in year 2 and year 3, dormant until the moment the settlement was signed, like timers that had been set years in advance. The house, the appraised value. The sale to Darius, 5 days, $185,000. The authorization letter he had signed in year 5, what it was supposed to cover, what it had been used for 9 times. Modified each time just enough to function, built on his own signature, and Phyllis Odom, who had said no, who had been removed from his vendor list within 2 weeks of saying no, who had spent 3 years thinking it was a business decision before she understood what it actually was. He laid all of it out in order, quietly, without heat. When he finished, the kitchen was quiet. Simone had stopped moving somewhere in the middle of it. She was standing very still now. Her arms had uncrossed. She was looking at the table. You could have, she started. There was nothing to discuss, he said. Not harshly, just clearly. You didn't make a decision in a bad moment. You started in year 2. That means you were already doing this when everything was still good, when I was still bringing you flowers. He looked at her. The marriage didn't drive you to this. You were already building this. The marriage ran alongside it. Silence. I gave you 11 years, she said. Her voice had dropped. The edge was gone. What was left underneath it was just someone who was very tired and had run out of angles. You gave me 4, he said quietly. After that, you were waiting for the number to get big enough. The room held that for a long time. Then she asked the Lektuch in a voice that had let go of everything it had been carrying. What do you want from me? Nothing, he said. Direct, not unkind. You already took what you believed you were owed. Now the people whose job it is to have opinions about fraud are going to do their jobs. That's between you and them. He stood, walked to the front door, opened it. She crossed the room slowly, stopped in the doorway, didn't look back right away. When she did, her face was different. Not composed, not performing, not the face she wore to charity galas or investor dinners or hangar tarmacs, where she had dressed for an occasion just her face, and something in it that might have been grief, or might have been the particular exhaustion of a woman who had been maintaining a very large lie for a very long time and had finally set it down. "You were good to me," she said. It was the first genuinely true thing she had said in years, and they both knew it. Dion looked at her. "I know." He closed the door, stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to her footsteps recede down the corridor outside. Then he walked back to the kitchen, sat down, put the kettle on, called Gloria. She picked up on the second ring. "It's done," he said. She didn't say anything for a moment, just the sound of her breathing steady. "Come home soon," she said. "Yeah," he said. "I will." The settlement was signed on a Thursday morning. Dion was not in the building. He was in his hangar, running a pre-flight check on the citation, slow, deliberate, the way Raymond had taught him, trusting his hands before his eyes. The terms were not what Simone would have chosen. A structured repayment agreement for the full $231,000, drawn against assets she actually held. Civil fraud findings entered into the public record. Permanent, not softened, not negotiated into language that could be misread by anyone who looked. Her name on a document trail that would surface in any background check, any due diligence process, any search conducted by anyone with a reason to look. For a woman who had spent years constructing a version of herself that didn't invite scrutiny, that was the most precise consequence possible. Not prison, not drama, not a courtroom moment designed for an audience, just the public record, accurate, permanent, saying exactly what it said. The Buckhead property sat in legal limbo for 4 months before it was liquidated as part of the repayment structure. It sold for $618,000, near appraised value. Dion noted that without feeling much about it. Bernard Holt lost his license to practice law in the state of Georgia 6 months after the state bar opened its investigation. The proceeding was not dramatic. It was administrative. The result was the same. Darius Caldwell's development project never broke ground. He resurfaced 8 months later in a smaller capacity with a different business structure, which was not Dion's business and which Dion paid no attention to. Life does not end for the people who wrong you. They move on and start something else and try again somewhere else. That is not your concern. Your concern is what you do with the space their departure leaves behind. Dion Webb knew exactly what to do with that space. 12 months after the settlement, he was somewhere over Georgia at 31,000 feet on a clear Thursday afternoon. The sky outside the window was the particular blue that only exists at altitude. Deep still, no clouds in any direction. Calvin sat across the aisle, reading glasses low on his nose, pen moving occasionally in the margins of the document he was reviewing. He had not spoken in 20 minutes. Dion had not spoken in 20 minutes. This was a normal 20 minutes for them. The specific, comfortable silence of two men who had known each other long enough that quiet did not require explaining. The contract on Dion's tray table was a Southeast Logistics partnership. 6 months of conversations, good numbers, the kind of deal that doesn't just change a quarter, the kind that changes what the next chapter of the company looks like. His phone buzzed on the armrest. Gloria, a photo, her kitchen. Sunday afternoon light coming through the window at that low warm angle, her dining table with plates on it and food, and the fruit bowl in the center with 2 oranges and something wrapped in foil that he suspected was her sweet potato pie. The people around the table were faces he had known his whole life. Gloria in the corner of the frame, not looking at the camera, looking at something someone had just said. The expression on her face was the one she had when she was genuinely happy, not performing happy, just happy. Below the photo 3 words, "We're proud, come." He looked at the photo for a long moment. At his mother's face, at the table, at the afternoon light. He set the phone face down on the armrest, looked out the window, at the altitude, at the clean, improbable distance between a garage floor in Southside Atlanta and this seat, this altitude, this afternoon. He thought about Raymond, about the shop, about the Saturday mornings and the smell of motor oil, and the particular patience of a man who believed the right way always took longer and was always worth it. He thought about year 2, about a Tuesday dinner and a vendor introduction, and how a thing that looked like ordinary life was also, underneath it, something else entirely. He thought about all the work, not just the company, not just the contracts. All of the building, every document, every careful, deliberate choice not to rush, not to react, not to give away what he knew before the right moment. He thought about what Raymond used to say. You just have to be patient enough to listen. He had been patient, for months, for years actually, without knowing it, and in the end, the truth had done exactly what truth always does when you give it enough room and enough time and enough careful, quiet, deliberate space to breathe. It found its own way into the light. Dion Webb reached for his pen, looked at the signature line at the bottom of the contract, the last page, his name waiting to be written there. He checked his hand. Old habit, from the shop, from Raymond. You don't put your hand on clean paper until your hand is clean. His hand was clean, it had been clean for a long time. He wrote his name on the line, set the pen down. The plane climbed higher. Below, Atlanta was somewhere under the clouds, moving and humming and going about its business, indifferent and continuous, and full of people who had no idea what had been built and dismantled and rebuilt over the past year. Above the clouds, the sky was clear, wide as consequence, steady as a man who had learned a long time ago, in a small shop on South Arlington Road, that the most important thing you can do when the engine sounds wrong is slow down. Listen, trust your hands, and wait for the truth to tell you what it's been trying to say all along. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment below. Tell me which moment hit you the hardest. Tell me where you're watching from tonight, and if you know someone who needed to hear this one, send it to them. Like this video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story, because the next one is about a man that everyone in the room had already counted out. Everyone, including the one person who should have known better. That story is coming. Don't miss it.